So I never thought I'd fall so hard for someone I'd known for years. Piper had always been there, on the periphery of my life, a friend of my cousin's who I'd see at family gatherings. She was this vibrant, magnetic presence that lit up every room she entered. But it wasn't until my cousin's wedding that everything changed. Do I remember that night vividly? The reception was in full swing, the dance floor packed with tipsy relatives and friends. I was taking a breather at the bar when Piper sat up next to me, her cheeks flushed from dancing. She looked stunning in her bridesmaid's dress, her hair slightly disheveled from the humidity. So we started chatting, reminiscing about old times and catching up on each other's lives. Maybe it was the champagne or the romantic atmosphere, but something shifted between us. One moment we were laughing about some shared childhood memory, and the next we were kissing in a quiet corner of the venue. What started as a spontaneous moment of passion quickly developed into something more. We began seeing each other regularly, stealing moments whenever we could. Despite my demanding job and a busy social life, we made it work. I found myself falling deeply in love with her infectious energy and zest for life. Before I knew it, our casual encounters had blossomed into a serious relationship. Piper brought a spark to my life that I didn't even realize was missing. She challenged me, excited me, and made me feel alive in ways I'd never experienced before. I never thought I'd fall so hard for Piper. We'd known each other for years, but it wasn't until my cousin's wedding that everything changed. There she was, radiant in a bridesmaid's dress, her laughter echoing across the reception hall. When our eyes met, I felt a spark I'd never experienced before. Later that night, we found ourselves alone on the balcony. The music from inside drifted out to us, and without thinking, I leaned in and kissed her. It was spontaneous, electric. From that moment on, we were inseparable. Piper brought a whirlwind of excitement into my life. Weekends that I used to spend catching up on work turned into adventures. She'd drag me to art galleries, underground concerts, or impromptu road trips. I found myself laughing more, worrying less. It was like she unlocked a part of me I didn't know existed. As our relationship deepened, the idea of living together seemed natural. I asked her to move into my city apartment, and to my delight, she agreed without hesitation. Watching her unpack her colorful clothes and quirky knickknacks, filling my once sterile space with life, I knew I was making the right choice. Sure, there were moments of doubt. Piper's carefree attitude sometimes clashed with my more structured lifestyle. She'd forget to pay her share of the bills or come home late without calling. But every time I started to worry, she'd flash that infectious smile, and I'd remember why I fell for her in the first place. One night, as we sat on our balcony watching the city lights, I realized I couldn't imagine my life without her. So the next day, I bought a ring. I proposed on a weekend getaway, down on one knee on a secluded beach at sunset. When she said yes, her eyes sparkling with tears, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Planning the wedding was a whirlwind. I wanted to give Piper everything she dreamed of, so I didn't hesitate to foot the entire bill. Looking back, maybe I should have seen the signs in how easily she spent my money, always opting for the most expensive options without a second thought. But I was too caught up in the excitement to care. The wedding day itself was perfect. Piper looked stunning in her gown, and the joy on her face as we said our vows made every penny worth it. As we danced our first dance as husband and wife, I felt certain that this was the beginning of our happily ever after. I never expected my life to take such a drastic turn. Piper had brought so much light and excitement into my world, but lately I felt like I was drowning in darkness. Our whirlwind romance and lavish wedding seemed like distant memories now. That night, I found myself alone in our apartment, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. The work had been brutal and I was exhausted. Piper was out again, probably at some club with her friends. I tried not to let it bother me, but the growing distance between us was becoming harder to ignore. As I flicked through Instagram, a live video caught my eye. It was from one of Piper's friends, showing the interior of a packed nightclub. The camera panned across the crowd, and suddenly there she was, my wife looking stunning in a skimpy dress, dancing with a group of guys I didn't recognize. I felt a twinge of unease, but I brushed it off. Piper had always been a social butterfly. But then the video zoomed in, following her as she giggled and let one of the men lead her towards a door marked staff only. My heart sank. I replayed the video, hoping I'd misinterpreted what I'd seen. But there was no mistaking it. Piper disappeared behind that door, surrounded by strange men. I sat there, staring at my phone, my mind racing. What was happening behind that door? I tried to rationalize it, to come up with innocent explanations, but deep down, I knew. Before I realized what I was doing, I was in my car, speeding towards the club. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn back, to not make a fool of myself. But I couldn't shake the image of Piper vanishing behind that door. The club was pulsing with music when I arrived. I pushed my way through the crowd, ignoring the annoyed looks from the other patrons. My eyes scanned frantically for any sign of Piper. "Hey, you can't go back there!" a bouncer yelled as I approached the staff door. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was anger. I shoved past him, using my size to my advantage. He grabbed at me, but I was already through the door. The backstage area was a maze of narrow corridors. I could hear muffled laughter and music coming from somewhere ahead, but my heart pounded in my chest as I followed the sounds. I turned a corner and froze. There, in a small lounge area, was Piper. She was sprawled across a couch, surrounded by 7 men. Piper was loving every second of it. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I felt sick, my vision blurring at the edges. So without thinking, I pulled out my phone and started recording. I needed proof. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. Her wedding ring glinted in the dim light, a mockery of everything we'd promised each other. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in shock. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and fled, pushing past confused staff members and clubgoers. The cool night air hit me like a slap to the face as I stumbled out of the club. I made it to my car before the tears came. I sat there, gasping for breath, feeling like my entire world had just imploded. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying what I'd seen over and over. When I got back to our apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, pulling out my phone. With shaking hands, I played the video I'd recorded. There it was in high definition, my wife, the woman I loved more than anything, betraying me in the most painful way possible. I watched it again. And again. Each time I hoped I'd see something different, something that would make this all okay, but each viewing only cemented the harsh reality. As the night wore on, Piper didn't come home. My phone remained silent, no calls, no texts, no explanations. I sat there in the dark, watching that damning video on repeat, feeling my love for Piper crumble with each viewing. By the time the first rays of sunlight began to peek through the curtains, I knew our marriage was over. The Piper I thought I knew, the woman I'd fallen in love with, didn't exist. And I couldn't live with the person she really was. I woke up the next morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My head was pounding, and my eyes were swollen from a night of tears and disbelief. The sun streaming through the curtains felt like a cruel joke, mocking the darkness that had settled in my heart. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number for James, a lawyer friend I'd met through work. My finger hovered over the call button for a moment before I mustered the courage to press it. "Fred, it's early, man. What's up?" James's groggy voice came through the speaker. "I need a divorce lawyer," I said, my voice cracking. "Can you recommend someone?" There was a pause on the other end. "Shit, Fred. I'm sorry, yeah, I know a guy. I'll text you his info." I thanked him and hung up. Within minutes, my phone buzzed a message containing the contact details for a divorce attorney. I made the call, setting up an appointment for later that day. So as I got ready to leave the house, I noticed Piper's side of the closet was empty. She must have come by while I was passed out, grabbing her things. The sight of the bare hangers made my stomach churn. I checked my phone, half hoping to see a message from her, an explanation, an apology, anything. But there was nothing. Just a notification from Instagram showing a new story from Harper, against my better judgment. I tapped it. There they were, Piper and Harper, laughing and clinking mimosa glasses at some trendy brunch spot. The caption read, "Girls' Day Out," as if nothing had happened, as if our world hadn't just imploded. I threw my phone across the room, hearing it clatter against the wall. The sound echoed through the empty house, a stark reminder of how alone I suddenly was. The meeting with a lawyer was a blur. We discussed assets, timelines, and legal procedure. Few words like infidelity and irreconcilable differences were thrown around, each one feeling like a knife twisting in my goat. As I drove home, I passed by our favorite coffee shop. Memories of lazy Sunday mornings spent there with Piper flooded my mind. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting back tears. To home, I found myself standing in my bedroom, staring at the empty space where Piper's things used to be. And the physical distance between us now matched the emotional chasm that opened up overnight. So I wondered where she was staying, if she was with Harper, if she even cared about what she'd done. So I collapsed onto the bed, our bed, and let the tears come. The reality of my situation hit me like a tidal wave. So I was alone, betrayed, and about to become divorced. The life I thought I had, the future I'd planned with Piper, it was all gone. I woke up to the incessant buzzing of my phone. Groggily, I reached for it, my eyes still heavy with sleep. The screen lit up, revealing a string of missed calls and messages from Piper. My stomach churned. It had been weeks since I'd last heard from her, and I'd hoped to keep it that way until the divorce was finalized. Reluctantly, I opened the most recent text. "Fred, please. We need to talk. It's important." I tossed the phone aside and dragged myself out of bed. As I stumbled to the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The man staring back at me looked tired, worn down. I splashed some cold water on my face, trying to shake off the fog of sleep and the dread that was settling in my gut. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my lawyer. Piper's attorney reached out, so they're requesting a meeting. How do you want to proceed? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Set it up, I replied. Let's get this over with. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Piper in a sterile conference room. She looked different. Her usual vibrant energy subdued, her eyes puffy and red-rimmed. For a moment, I felt a pang of concern, but I quickly pushed it aside. Fred, she began, her voice trembling. I know I've hurt you. I know I've made mistakes, but please, can we talk about this? About us? I kept my face impassive. There's nothing to talk about, Piper. The divorce papers have been filed. It's over. Ah. She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine. But what if it's not? What if there's a reason to try again? I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. And what reason would that be? Piper took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine. I'm pregnant, Fred. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. It could be yours, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. We were together just before everything happened. For a brief moment, I felt the flicker of hope. A child. Our child, the family we talked about having. But then reality came crashing back. The images of Piper with other men, the nights she'd spent out while I was working. So how can you be sure it's mine? I asked, my voice cold. Piper flinched at my tone. I can't be certain. But there's a chance, Fred. A good chance. Isn't that worth exploring? I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. A part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to cling to the possibility of salvaging something from the wreckage of our marriage. But the rational part of me, the part that had been betrayed and hurt, knew better. We'll need a paternity test, I said finally. I won't make any decisions until we know for sure. Piper nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Of course, whatever you need. I hope this can be a new start for us, Fred. A chance to make things right. I stood up, unable to bear the weight of her hopeful gaze any longer. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll do the test, and we'll go from there. As I left the room, I could hear Piper's muffled sobs behind me. I forced myself to keep walking, to not look back. I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not again. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and medical appointments. The divorce proceedings continued, but with the added complication of the potential pregnancy. I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself from the constant churning of emotions, hope, fear, anger, longing. Finally, the day of the paternity test results arrived. I sat in the doctor's office, my heart pounding in my chest. Piper sat across from me, fidgeting nervously with the hem of her shirt. The doctor entered, a manila envelope in hand. We have the results, he said, his face neutral. I took a deep breath. And? He opened the envelope, scanning the contents. The words echoed in my ears. Not the father. Not my child. Not our second chance. Yet I looked at Piper, who had collapsed into silent tears. For a moment I felt a twinge of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of anger and betrayal. I guess that settles it, I said, standing up. I'll have my lawyer contact yours to finalize the divorce. Fred, please, Piper choked out. I'm sorry. I really thought, I hoped. I cut her off, my voice hard. It's over, Piper. For good this time. As I walked out of the doctor's office, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with the pain. The last thread of hope had been severed, but with it came a sense of clarity. I could move forward now, without the lingering what-ifs that had been plaguing me. I called my lawyer from the parking lot. Let's wrap this up, I said. I want the divorce finalized as soon as possible. As I hung up, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few months start to lift. It wasn't the ending I had once hoped for, but it was an ending nonetheless. And for now, that was enough. No long after I sat in the lawyer's office, the weight of finality settling on my shoulders. The papers were spread out before me, each page a testament to the end of what I once thought was my forever. With a deep breath, I picked up the pen and signed my name. Fred, just Fred now. No longer a husband. No longer part of a we. And as I walked out of the office, the world seemed different. The colors were muted, the sounds distant. So I made my way home. No, not home anymore. Just a house filled with memories I needed to leave behind. So I threw myself into work with a fervor I hadn't felt in years. Long hours at the office became my new normal. Colleagues noticed the change, but I brushed off their concerns with forced smiles and vague explanations. Work was my sanctuary, my escape from the thoughts that threatened to overwhelm me in quiet moments. One evening, as I scrolled through my phone, I came across a photo of Piper. Without hesitation, I hit block. Then I went through my entire contact list, blocking her family members one by one. It felt cold, clinical even, but necessary. I needed a clean break, a fresh start. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, reports and late nights at the office. I barely noticed the changing seasons outside my window. But slowly, surely I felt something shift inside me. The raw pain began to dull, replaced by a quiet determination to move forward. I decided I needed a change of scenery. The city held too many memories, too many places that reminded me of her. I started looking for job opportunities elsewhere, somewhere I could start anew. An offer came from a firm in Seattle. It was a step up in my career, with better pay and more responsibilities. But more importantly, it was a chance to reinvent myself. I accepted without hesitation. Packing up my life was both liberating and terrifying. Each item I placed in a box represented a part of my past I was leaving behind. When I came across our wedding album, I hesitated for a moment before placing it in the donation pile. Some memories were better left behind. The drive to Seattle was long, but with each mile I felt the weight on my chest lighten. As I crossed state lines, I allowed myself a small smile. This was it, my new beginning. Setting up my new apartment felt like an act of rebellion against my old life. I bought new furniture, decorated in a style that was entirely my own. So no compromises, no consideration for anyone else's tasties, just mine. Work kept me busy, but I forced myself to explore my new city during weekends. I joined a gym, started hiking in the nearby mountains. Slowly, I was rediscovering parts of myself I had forgotten existed. Time passed. The pain of my past became a distant memory, a scar that had healed over. I still thought of Piper sometimes, but the thoughts no longer brought the sharp sting of betrayal. Instead, I felt a sort of detached pity. She had her own demons to face, her own path to walk. It was during a company retreat that I met Sarah. She was from the marketing department, quick-witted and kind. We bonded over terrible coffee and inside jokes about our overzealous team-building exercises. At first, I was cautious. The memory of my failed marriage made me wary of opening up again. Sarah was patient, understanding. She never pushed, always giving me the space I needed. Our relationship grew slowly, organically. Movie nights turned into weekend getaways. Casual dinners became intimate conversations that lasted until dawn. With Sarah, I rediscovered what it meant to trust, to love without fear. 2 years after my divorce, I found myself down on one knee again. This time there was no grand gesture, no elaborate setup. Just the two of us in our favorite spot in the park, with the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Sarah said yes, and I felt a joy I thought I'd never experience again. As we planned our wedding, I marveled at how different it felt this time around. There was no rush, no desperation to prove anything to anyone. Just two people, committed to building a life together. Our wedding day dawned bright and clear. As I stood at the altar, watching Sarah walk down the aisle, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Well, this was right. This was where I was meant to be. Life with Sarah was everything I had hoped for and more. We had our ups and downs, of course, but we faced them together. Communication, trust, and mutual respect formed the foundation of our relationship. When Sarah told me she was pregnant, I was overjoyed. As I held our daughter for the first time, I felt love so pure and overwhelming that it brought tears to my eyes. This was my family, my future. Looking back now, I can see how far I've come. The pain I experienced with Piper taught me valuable lessons about myself and about love. It was a difficult journey, but one that led me to where I am today. Well, I haven't seen or heard from Piper since our divorce. Sometimes I wonder how she's doing, but I no longer feel the need to know. Our past diverged long ago, and I'm at peace with that. My life now is filled with the kind of happiness I once thought was lost to me forever. Sarah and our children bring joy to each day, even the challenging ones. I've found contentment in the simple moments, family dinners, bedtime stories, weekend outings. The man I was before, the one who was shattered by betrayal, feels like a stranger now. I'm grateful for the strength I found within myself, for the resilience that carried me through those dark times. As I sit here watching my family in our backyard, I feel a profound sense of gratitude. Your life has a way of surprising you, of leading you to exactly where you need to be. My journey wasn't easy, but it led me here, to this moment of pure, unfiltered happiness. And that, I realize, makes it all worthwhile.